Kotarou Satоу is a 4-year-old boy who is serious and quite mature for his age. But he wasn't always like this. He used to live with his parents until his mother, who suffered from postpartum disorder, decided to leave him with his father. She asked him to take care of himself and he eagerly agreed, not knowing he was being abandoned. However, his father turned out to be abusive, so he had to run away from him at 3 years old and went to live in a group home. The other kids there didn't like him except for Tasaku and Ryota. Tasaku was the first one to make him feel welcome. He also helped him get along with the other kids. Ryota taught him how to use a camera to take pictures of the stars and made him want to watch a meteor shower. Everything was going well until the day his father found him. His father was very aggressive and demanded to see him after having seen his picture on the group home's website. The kids were scared of him and so was Kotarou. He decided to run away from the group home and find himself a place to live on his own. He arrives at the Shimizu apartment complex to find the place. Once he's settled in his room, he goes to a nearby convenience store to get some tissues because there is comfort food. After all, his mother often ignored him and his basic needs, so he got used to eat tissues instead. He also buys a toy sword in case there's an enemy attack on his way home. He uses one sheet of the tissue to write his name and pastes it on his door. And while he's doing that, he hears his neighbor Shin Karino fighting with his girlfriend. Karino is a manga artist who constantly loses track of time because of his work and laziness. His girlfriend calls him a loser and breaks up with him because he has a small controller. Kotarou goes over to him and offers him a box of tissues to show goodwill. Karino accepts and asks about Kotarou's parents. Kotarou lets him know that he'll be living alone. This confuses Karino and Kotarou doesn't explain the situation, he just goes back to his room. Later, he returns to Karino to tell him that his apartment has no bathtub. Karino explains that the units don't have bathtubs, although some may have showers. There's a nearby bathhouse and Kotarou decides to go there. Karino joins him after seeing a missing child on the news. He doesn't want to be an irresponsible adult who isn't paying attention to children. While they wash, Kotarou gets shampoo in his eyes and Karino has to help him. He ends up helping him wash his hair, which makes Kotarou express that it's been a while since someone washed his hair. This surprises Karino as he wasn't it from a child. As they go back home, Karino asks Kotarou where his parents are, and Kotarou replies that he doesn't have them anymore. Karino is taken aback and feels bad for asking, so he decides to reveal that he also doesn't have parents. Kotarou thinks that he must be lonely, which concerns Karino. He asks if Kotarou feels lonely but then decides to let it go and hurry up inside because it's too cold. The next day, Kotarou goes over to Karino again and finds him home. He's surprised to know that Karino doesn't usually have plans, even on a weekday. So he leaves without saying anything else, and Karino follows him wanting to know where he's going. As they walk, a woman from the same apartment complex, Mizuki Yakutomo, spots them and says hello to Kotarou, who gave her a tissue box as well. This is the first time Mizuki meets Karino, so she thinks he's Kotarou's father because they kind of look alike. Karino clears the misunderstanding quickly and introduces himself as a neighbor too. He later thinks about this incident after he and Kotarou get to their destination, the convenience store. He doesn't think he and Kotarou look alike, but everyone else at the store seems to think so. This starts to freak him out. He starts calculating the years when he learns that Kotarou is 4 years old. He remembers his ex, who he probably knocked up because she always forgets to mark her calendar. He panics and asks Kotarou all sorts of questions. Kotarou becomes confused and asks him to stop following him around because the other customers are mistaking them for father and son. He says Karino looks nothing like his father and walks away. Karino is relieved to hear this. While walking back home, Karino is still thinking about how relieved he is, but he also thinks about his loneliness, while Kotarou is still annoyed with him. Karino reminds him that he's the one who wanted to hang out tonight, but Kotarou corrects him. He just wanted to watch his TV because he's still waiting for his to arrive. Kotarou then apologizes for the way the customers at the store behaved, which he noticed might have alarmed Karino. Karino doesn't want him to feel like it was his fault, so he tries to be polite, but Kotarou doesn't see a problem with it since he believes he's a feudal lord and Karino is his servant. It would hurt Karino's pride to have a child with such high rank. Karino is shocked and slightly annoyed with this, but lets it go since it's just a child's imagination. Later, he sees Mizuki, who apologizes for her earlier mistake. She now knows that Kotarou lives alone. Karino tells her that he keeps wondering about Kotarou's feeling with the whole father and son situation. He worries about him a little. The next day, Kotarou goes to take out the trash and Karino does the same at the exact same time. They see Mizuki open door and find her lying on the floor with beer cans around her. Kotaro wakes her up and she wakes up, still drunk. Kotaro then suddenly rushes to the convenience store and Karino follows him behind because he doesn't want him go alone. Kotaro wants to get some ice drink for Mizuki quickly and they soon make it back. Mizuki is grateful for Kotaro's gesture, not thinking much of it. Kotaro tells her to wrap it and press it on her eyes, which have swelled up due to her crying excessively. Mizuki is shocked to hear that Kotaro was able to tell she was crying. She denies it though, but Kotaro lets her know that crying is fine and wouldn't change his opinion her. She's touched by this and thanks him for being a kind person. After Kotaro and Karino leave, Karino asks Kotaro how he knew Mizuki was crying and that applying ice would help. Kotaro reveals that he's witnessed many adults in his lifetime crying. Plus, he was popular, so of course he'd know these kinds of things. The next day, Kotaro decides to clean outside his door because birds keep pooping there. As he does, he sees a bird about to poop and tries to catch it. He falls and hurts his knees. He tries to apply a plaster but he's too scared. However, he gets the courage and does it. He goes to tell Karino about it and finds him in pain too, having sprained his back. Karino wonders if Kotaro wants to be praised, but Kotaro becomes embarrassed and says he just wanted to tell him about his bravery because he used to struggle with it before. Karino asks him to help him apply a heating patch if he's brave now and Kotaro does so. After Karino draws Tana Soman Kotaro's favorite cartoon on one of his knees, this makes Kotaro so happy that he smiles a little and calls it a job well done. Karino is left amazed that the kid can actually smile, but then they argue about the other drawing because it's ugly. Right then they hear a man ringing Kotaro's doorbell. He looks like a thug and doesn't seem friendly at all. They confront him and it turns out to be another one of their neighbors, Isamu Tamaru from the first floor. He also turns out to be fond of cute things and extremely friendly to Kotaro. He thanks him for the tissue box and tries to hug him as Kotaro is too cute. Kotaro becomes alarmed and brings out his sword to stop him, but Tamaru doesn't care. He drags Kotaro by the hand to go and play in his room. Karino quickly follows them behind in concern. In his room, Tamaru gives Kotaro a stuffed Tana Soman as a gift and Kotaro accepts. But he still warns Tamaru to stay away from him because he doesn't like the affection. Tamaru is glad Kotaro likes the gift because he was about to throw it away. He had bought it for his son, but the mom refused him access. Kotaro returned the gift because he doesn't want to be used as a replacement for Tamaru's son. He also feels like Tamaru would be lying to him since the gift wasn't intended for him. Tamaru realizes his mistake and apologizes. Kotaro and Karino then go back to their floor and Kotaro sadly asks Karino if the drawings on his plasters were a lie too. Karino asks if his smile when he saw them was a lie. Kotaro becomes embarrassed and replies with a no before running to his room. He sits on his chair and sings the Tana Soman song. At night, Kotaro goes over to Karino to watch TV again. He watches Tana Soman and copies everything Tana Soman says, which annoys Karino. He wonders why Kotaro is so obsessed with the show, even though it's not popular. The next day they go to the bathhouse and Kotaro can't stop singing the Tana Soman song. Karino asks why he likes the show and Kotaro answers that it has a special place in his heart, though it's not good or even entertaining. He didn't even know that TV was supposed to be entertaining. Right then, another kid who is with his father refuses to go home. He keeps crying, so Kotaro goes over to tell him that he's lucky to have someone who cares about him. Unlike Kotaro, he won't have to look for guidance from a TV show, so his life will be fine. The kid stops crying and leaves with his father. Karino realizes that Kotaro likes Tana Soman because it helps him with his life. He doesn't know how to react, so he just quietly watches. Kotaro then clarifies to him that he doesn't need guidance from Tana Soman anymore because he's an adult now, but he puts on his shirt backwards, meaning that he isn't much of an adult at 4 years old. Anyhow, he continues to watch Tana Soman at home and they announce that it will be ending that night, which slightly saddens Kotaro. He goes out to the street to start a business. He pays passersby 10 yen each to perform his best Tana Soman impression. The catch is they have to enjoy his performance to get the money. This reminds him of his mother, who used to seem to always enjoy his performances. Later at night he prepares to watch the final episode of Tana Soman. Karino and Tamaru decide to join him so he isn't lonely in this. They also join him in repeating everything Tana Soman says. Tamaru is happy to do it, but Karino is not in the mood, which annoys Tamaru. They end up arguing, but Kotaro is happy that they are there and allows them to gift him 10 yen each. After they leave and Karino asks Kotaro if he'll be fine at night now that the show is over. Kotaro believes he's an adult now, so he'll be fine. He tries his best to be fine at midnight, even when he can hear Karino snoring through the wall. He's confident he will make it through the night without the company of Tana-sama on TV. One night, Karino and Kotaro visit the bathhouse and find it temporarily closed. Kotaro is disappointed because personal hygiene is important to him. However, Karino doesn't care since he doesn't bathe every day and loves to smell like a Redditmon. The next morning, when they both out their trash, Kotaro asks Karino to keep his distance from him. He behaves strangely and constantly watches Karino as he walks away, even when they walk on the street, going to the convenience store. Kotaro watches Karino to make sure he's keeping his distance. At the store, he gives the cashier his money using the tip of his toy sword and asks for the change to be given back same way. He also asks Karino to handle the transactions for him while he stands outside and uses a phone to communicate with him. Karino gets annoyed because he doesn't understand what is going on and tries to approach him. Kotaro jumps back and explains that he hasn't bathed and doesn't want to offend people with his smell. Karino doesn't see it as a big deal, which makes Kotaro walk away offended because his personal hygiene is very important to him. Mizuki is watching nearby and walks over to Karino to tell him to be mindful of his words next time. She thinks there's more to the situation than just bathing. She speculates that Kotaro might have some kind of trauma related to being dirty or not bathing. He's scared people might hate him because of his lack of hygiene. The two return home and visit Kotaro through the window. Mizuki sees him bathing in the kitchen sink. He asks her not to judge him since he's trying to be clean so Karino doesn't hate him. This makes Karino, who is out of Kotaro's side, sad. He consciously decides to always accompany Kotaro to the bathhouse, which is now open every day from then on. He wouldn't hate him for not bathing for a couple of days, but he also doesn't want to make him feel terrible. Unfortunately for him, Kotaro asks Mizuki to accompany him to the bathhouse the next day. It's more enjoyable with a lady. This annoys Karino and Mizuki luckily declines because she has work. Karino smirks. He was probably starting to worry that a kid has more riz than him. At night, Kotaro struggles to fall asleep. Mizuki finds him outside with a pillow and asks what's wrong. He doesn't say and decides to go back to his room. The next day, Mizuki sees him again and notices eye bags under his eyes but doesn't ask anything. When she comes back from work, she sees that his light is on, meaning he's still struggling. In the morning, Karino asks him about the eye bags. Mizuki interrupts them and invites Kotaro to a sleepover and going to the bathhouse. Kotaro accepts and they do both of those things, but the next day his eye bags are even worse. He goes back to his room and Mizuki tells Karino that Kotaro is having nightmares so he avoids sleeping. Karino asks him about it and Kotaro confirms. He feels embarrassed about having nightmares still. Late that night, Karino decides to put his futon closer to Kotaro's wall, and Kotaro finally gets some sleep. Spring arrives and Kotaro goes to kindergarten alone. Earlier, Karino had asked him where he was going, but he refused to say because he didn't want him to know. Mizuki and Tamaru decided to visit him but don't find him. They are surprised that he left on his own. At school, a kid named Takuya asks Kotaro why he's alone when everyone is with their family. Kotaro tells him that his parents are there with him, but they're ninjas so they can't be seen. Takuya believes this and gets excited by it. Soon Karino, Mizuki and Tamaru figure out where Kotaro went and rush to the school for his entrance ceremony. He doesn't show any emotion to their arrival, but he asks one of them to fix his name badge. During lunch, the kids talk about their lunch boxes which their parents made for them. Kotaro takes pictures of their lunch boxes so he can create something similar to. He makes a Tana-sama lunch the following week and even asks people at the convenience store for ideas for his next lunch. They help him come up with something, but Takuya doesn't think it's as cool as the Tana-sama one. However, Kotaro absolutely loves it because he made it with someone and not just by himself as he always did. He even waits by the store to thank the people who helped him. One day, Kotaro sees a man giving out balloons at the convenience store. He's concerned that the man will fly away with the balloon. The man assures him that it's fine, but Kotaro thinks he's too skinny to do the job because he might fly away. He also feels sorry for him because he seems like he has no choice. So he asks for more than one balloon in order to help. But the man tells him that it's one balloon per person, so he asks for the red one. He goes away and returns in a hat to ask for another one. The man recognizes him, but Kotaro denies having gotten a balloon before. The man realizes what he's doing, but he gives him a blue one which Kotaro says it's for his younger brother. The red one was for his younger sister. He then returns again wearing sunglasses. He asks for a pink balloon for his mom. The man is skeptical because he's not sure if a mom would like a balloon. Kotaro becomes offended and asks the man to apologize for offending all mothers in the world. The man decides to give him a balloon to let the matter go. Kotaro returns for more, wearing a scarf and even doing an impression. He asks for a light blue balloon for his father, which makes the man think he will soon return for a balloon for himself, but Kotaro doesn't return. He goes to ask Karino to draw the faces of a boy, a girl, a mom, and a dad on the balloons. Karino does so and Kotaro labels them with the respective titles. He goes to play at the park with the balloons tied around his waist, and the balloon man sees him there. He almost gets mad to see that Kotaro kept all the balloons for himself, but then sees the labels on them. He starts to feel bad and watches as Kotaro plays alone, hoping that the balloons last a little longer so Kotaro doesn't feel too lonely. On a school day, when the day ends, Karino goes to fetch Kotaro. He gets a call from his editor for a meeting and Kotaro decides to tag along. It's an awkward meeting and the editor doesn't like Karino's drawing as always. However, Kotaro intervenes because he thinks Karino's work is fine and the editor is overthinking. He even challenges him to draw something better if he can. Karino tries to stop him, but the editor motions for him to leave the room. Karino goes to the restroom and leaves Kotaro behind. Kotaro asks the editor what he likes about Karino's work. The editor says he likes the storytelling, but wants Karino to become a better artist, which is why he pushes him to do better. Later when they go home, Kotaro tells Karino that he should work harder to make his editor proud. Karino is surprised that Kotaro has changed sides and explains that he could have gotten him fired. However, Kotaro was just doing this to repay Karino's kindness for always taking him to school and fetching him. He also plans to follow him to work next time as well. Next time though, Kotaro is as harsh as the editor and doesn't think Karino's drawings are good enough. On another day, Kotaro asks Tamaru to accompany him to do shopping. He wants to buy stylish clothes to become popular. The two head to the mall and Kotaro buys an outfit he likes. He asks everyone at the store if it looks good and they all agree that it does. Tamaru thought Kotaro wanted to impress a crush, but it turns out that Kotaro wants to impress everyone. He wants everyone to be his friend so they don't hate him. Tamaru, who people don't, tells him that only close-minded people hate what they don't understand. He's his friend even when he's not a stylish kid. An officer comes to them suspicious of Tamaru and questions him. Kotaro defends him and calls him his friend, which makes Tamaru too happy and he successfully hugs Kotaro. At night, Kotaro goes to the club Mizuki works at to support her. Mizuki is surprised to see him and calls Karino to come pick him up. In the meantime, Kotaro catches the attention of the other workers and pays them to watch him do impressions of Tana Soman. They temporarily hire him and make Karino pay a selection fee to take him home. Kotaro visits the club the next night, which starts to concern Mizuki. She tells him to stop coming because they can hang out outside work, but Kotaro is worried they won't be able to because she's planning to move away. While they were hanging out one day, she told him she wouldn't renew her lease, but then she changed her mind because she didn't want to be lonely without Kotaro as her neighbor. Unfortunately, Kotaro left before she could tell him that and went to ask Karino how to spend more time with her before she left. Karino is the one who gave him the idea to visit her workplace. Kotaro then asks if Mizuki will stay with him if he continues to select her every day. Mizuki feels touched and agrees to stay with him. Later, she calls Karino to come pick him up and the three of them spend a little more time together at the club. The next day, Mizuki takes Kotaro on a picnic and Karino joins them. The two adults want to take a picture of Kotaro but he refuses and around until Karino gets too exhausted. Mizuki continues to chase him and gets multiple pictures, but all of them don't show his face. After a while they go home. Karino asks Kotaro why he covered his face in the school picture. Kotaro replies that he doesn't like pictures of his face. In reality though, he's scared his father will find him again. Ever since the incident at the group home, he swore never to take pictures of himself ever again, no matter how happy the memories are. The next day, while walking to school, Karino gives Kotaro a drawing he made of him and Mizuki. Kotaro becomes happy and compliments, and even though he still thinks it needs more work, he even asks for it to be colored in and Karino agrees to do that for him. One day, Kotaro gets a visit from Ayano Kobayashi, a female lawyer who's in charge of his account. Kotaro performs a song for her which she pretends to enjoy. He then prepares some chicken for her and after she gives him his allowance, he gives her a gift in return and asks where the money came from. Kobayashi was told everything about Kotaro and what he would do during her visit. She was also told that he asked about the money and that she should lie, saying it's a donation. In reality though, it comes from Kotaro's mother's life insurance. She has passed away and Kotaro doesn't know. He's also not supposed to be told. Kobayashi feels bad for him but still tells him that it's a donation. Kotaro is grateful but he doesn't believe her because he has heard the same answer too many times. He hopes that he can express his appreciation to the donor, even though he can't meet them. After Kobayashi leaves and finds her senior waiting for her outside the gate asking how it went, Kobayashi still feels strange and asks him when they will tell Kotaro the truth. The senior tells her to look inside the bag and she notices a diary. The senior reveals Kotaro is a lot more smarter than they think. Despite not knowing the truth deep down, they are sure of one thing: Kotaro knows his allowance is related to his mother and that's why he writes a journal. He writes it down so that she can hear about him. He wants her to know that he's doing well and taking care of himself. However, Kobayashi feels extremely sad about it because Kotaro is putting so much effort without knowing the truth. This forces her to a decision. From now on, she will be the one to give Kotaro his allowance. On another day, Kotaro visits one of his friend, Kakeru, at his home. Kakeru is left with the housekeeper, Miss Yoshida, and she does everything for him. This is a foreign concept to Kotaro, especially because Kakeru is too dependent on Miss Yoshida. A few days later, Kotaro takes Kakeru fishing. The walk to the river is too much for Kakeru and he asks for piggy ride from Kotaro. Kotaro encourages him to walk on his own. They soon get to the river and Kakeru doesn't want to fish because he doesn't know how. Kotaro encourages him to try so that he can grow up and fend for himself. Kakeru tries and catches a crayfish which pinches his finger. He cries for help but Kotaro tells him to stop relying on people too much. In the end, Kakeru catches 2 crayfish and Kotaro decides they'll cook them at his house even though Kakeru thinks it's gross. At Kotaro's place, Kakeru is confused as to why they have to cook their own food. He thinks it's best to buy from the store or have the adults cook something for them. Kotaro asks him what he'd do to survive if he didn't have any adults to help him. Kakeru can't even imagine this reality. He wouldn't want that to happen in the first place, so Kotaro motivates him to try his best to be independent. Kakeru becomes motivated and excited. He successfully manages to cook the crayfish and tells Kotaro that if he ever feels lonely, he can go fishing with him. This makes Kotaro emotional and he thanks him for the offer. On a different day at school, Kotaro gets used for target practice in a game of dodgeball. He doesn't understand the rules so he gets knocked out and bleeds from his nose. He asks Karino to help him master the game for next time. He wants to learn how to catch, but he keeps getting kicked in the face. Yet, he still refuses to practice throwing because he only wants to catch. He fails and gets hit in the face in the next game at school. Even his peers are confused because it's clear that he doesn't understand the rules, but he doesn't care at all. Karino helps him practice again, but he still can't catch the ball. Karino tells him to just dodge the ball, but Kotaro doesn't believe in that. He believes that dodging a ball thrown by a friend is like ignoring their efforts, and that's unacceptable. He likens playing dodgeball to having a conversation. If you talk to someone and that someone ignores you, you get hurt. It's what happened to him in the past when he was showing a drawing to his mother and she ignored him. Karino tries to console him by assuring him that his efforts were probably received even when they weren't reciprocated. The next day, Kotaro succeeds in catching the ball at school. He throws it back and he gets caught by Kakeru. Kakeru thinks this is too easy and comments that he could do it all day. This makes Kotaro happy because his efforts have been well received, though this isn't what the game is about. One day when Karino fetches Kotaro from school, he realizes that Kotaro has a paper crown on his head. The crown was from a birthday party his class threw for him. Mizuki and Tamaru overhear, but it's Kotaro's birthday and decided to throw him another birthday party. Kotaro doesn't understand why because he already had one. They tell him that he can have as many parties as he wants because they are a celebration for him. They are to show that they are thankful he was born. Kotaro is surprised because he never realized that being born was something to be celebrated. He decides to prepare for it by practicing to blow out his candles in one breath and singing a birthday song. On the day of the celebration, Kotaro takes the cake and leaves without the neighbors noticing. He runs to the park so his friends can share in on his celebration. His friends are some 4 cats he sometimes plays with at the park. He wants them to know that he's thankful that they were born because no one will ever celebrate them. He sings them the birthday song and blows out the candles in one breath. The cats understand his gesture and lick him in return. The 3 neighbors are left waiting for him to return to his own birthday party. Another day, Kotaro gets a visit from his friend Takuya, who is planning to run away. Kotaro accompanies him and finds out the reason he's running away. Takuya is sick of doing chores, flushing the toilet and such at home. All he wants to do is go as far away as possible and do whatever he wants. Kotaro warns him not to take his family for granted, but Takuya couldn't care less. If he runs away, his family would regret treating him like this. They go to the convenience store first to buy snacks, but Kotaro has to pay for them because Takuya doesn't have money. Takuya is surprised that Kotaro actually has money and can buy as many snacks as he wants. They then go to the park and stay until late. Kotaro thought they were supposed to go as far as possible and even get in trouble, like getting on the train and leaving town. But Takuya refuses to take the train alone because it's not safe. He's surprised to learn that Kotaro could do that and doesn't have a bedtime. He thinks Kotaro is lucky. Kotaro tries to tell him that his life isn't lucky, but Takuya doesn't want to listen. They then decide to go to Kotaro's place to sleep because sleeping in the park isn't ideal. That's when Takuya realizes that Kotaro is left all alone at home. Kotaro tells him that his parents are away doing ninja stuff, so there's no one there to worry about him if he runs away. Takuya feels really bad, he apologizes and decides to go home. Kotaro is left thinking about how there's truly no one to worry about him if he was to run away, but Karino appears and scolds him for worrying him and the others since they couldn't find him all day. Kotaro starts to feel better knowing someone was actually worried about him and he apologizes. The next day, Kobayashi arrives to give him his allowance and gets a performance and a gift from him. After another weekend, she visits again and gets another performance. She plays along and cheers him up, but Kotaro feels like she's uncomfortable and anxious around him. He asks why and she nervously replies that she's just an anxious person. Right then, a delivery for Karino arrives at Kotaro's door. Karino is not home, so they leave the package with Kotaro. Kotaro is too curious and opens the package to find beer. He decides to offer it to Kobayashi. Kobayashi reluctantly accepts and ends up drunk. As a result, she ends up telling Kotaro exactly what she thinks about him. He's weird and tone deaf. Kotaro is glad to hear that Kobayashi is now comfortable enough to express herself. So he asks her where his allowance comes from. Kobayashi instantly stops dancing in shock. She didn't expect the question at that moment. She then tells him that it comes from a donor and apologizes over and over again, saying that's truth while crying and bowing. She ends up falling asleep in that position and Kotaro thanks her for her efforts to protect his feelings. Soon, a summer festival is hosted at the kindergarten, but only Karino volunteers to help out. He has Tamaru, Mizuki, his editor, and the convenience store clerk help out too. There were some parents who used to gossip about the neighbors for being unimpressive and not being Kotaro's real parents. But at the end of the day, the neighbors were the ones who came through for their children's festival. One of the moms, who wasn't part of the gossip, expresses her gratitude to Karino for his massive help. Karino tells her that despite the success of the festival, he feels it would be better if Kotaro's parents were there with him. Kotaro comes and thanks Karino for this festival and Karino encourages him to have as much fun as possible. The mom is happy that Kotaro has someone like Karino in his life, even if his parents aren't there. One day, Kotaro goes to the convenience store with Karino to buy some tissues. The worker there recommends him an expensive silky brand. Kotaro buys it while Karino buys a generic and cheap one. On the way home, Kotaro boasts about expensive tissue brands to Karino, especially because the tissues are sweet. Karino is confused about that. He thinks Kotaro might be talking about this now, but later at night while watching TV, he sees an interview of a man talking about how he used to eat tissues when he was young, alone, and hungry. This reminds him of what Kotaro said about the tissues being sweet. The next time they go to the convenience store, Karino asks Kotaro if the previous brand tasted sweet and Kotaro says yes. Kotaro then checks another brand and says the ingredients are nutritional. Karino gives him the generic brand and tells him that he doesn't have to eat tissues anymore because he's no longer alone. Kotaro realizes that it's true, he now has somebody by his side. When he gets home, he makes a full meal with multiple side dishes. Right then, Karino visits him with a bulletin board for a yoga class. He's surprised with the amount of food Kotaro has, and Kotaro tells him that he always eats like that. Mizuki arrives to check the board too and sees the food. She asks to try some and Kotaro lets her. They all end up eating together. After, Karino wonders why Kotaro made so much food when he's eating alone, but Mizuki doesn't worry about it. The next evening, Kotaro makes dinner and invites his 3 neighbors to eat together. He has made a vegetable and beef stir-fry. The neighbors are confused that the food isn't as much as the previous night, but Kotaro assures them that the stir-fry is delicious. When they eat it, they find that it's true, the food is amazing. This makes Kotaro happy because he's eating with people, which is why he made just one dish. He usually makes more food when he eats alone so that he doesn't have to feel lonely. But the next night, he goes back to his ways and makes more food because he's eating alone. On a school day, the teacher wants the kids to do a show for Parents' Day. Kotaro asks to play the role of the smiling sun. The teacher and other kids are surprised to hear this because they've never seen him smiling before. However, Kotaro shows them that he's a pro at fake smiling. It looks so natural and cute. He shocks all of them. The teacher tells Karino about this later. She feels bad that Kotaro has to fake a smile. She wishes he could enjoy his kindergarten days too. Karino explains how he relates to Kotaro because he also didn't smile for a long time after he lost his parents. He thinks Kotaro is doing the same thing because he's also going through a rough time. Soon, the parents' day arrives, the kids do the show and Kotaro nails the smiling sun. The teacher convinces him and asks him to smile more often, but Kotaro only knows how to fake smile and doing that all day is exhausting. He also thinks the teacher is also fake smiling even when she's tired. He can see through it. The teacher is shocked because it's true. Kotaro promises not to tell anyone and she thanks him with a genuine smile. One night, Kotaro goes to watch a meteor shower up a mountain with Ryota. He apologizes to him for running away without saying goodbye. Ryota isn't mad at him because it wasn't his fault. Plus, it doesn't matter because he kept their promise to watch the meteor shower together. Kotaro then apologizes for taking Ryota's camera when he left. He just wanted something to remember him by. Ryota takes the camera and gives him the memory card so he can have their memories forever. The meteor shower starts and the two friends create another great memory together. Kotaro later manages to have the pictures of him and Ryota printed out so he can look at them whenever he likes. After some time has passed, Kotaro goes to submit Karino's manuscript to his editor because Karino has a cold. He makes conversation which annoys the editor even though he doesn't say it. As they chat, Kotaro finds out that the editor is married and has kids, which shocks him. He takes back the name of script and asks the editor to go home because it's a Sunday and his kids must miss him so much. The editor is surprised by his boldness and invites him to his home for some Tana Somen march. Kotaro can't refuse Tana Somen and accepts right away. When they get there, Kotaro enjoys himself by playing games and taking pictures of the life-size Tana Somen doll. But then he starts to feel bad because the editor is supposed to be spending time with his kids. The next day, the editor visits Karino to discuss the manuscript and tells him about how much Kotaro is. He explains that he took him to his house because he wanted him to have some fun as a kid just once. When he's leaving, Kotaro comes out to meet him and tells him that he'll be visiting his house again. One day, Kotaro and Karino go to the convenience store and Kotaro sees that the store clerk is pregnant. He doesn't know this though, so he assumes she has been forced to eat a lot of food. To help her not eat so much, he buys everything she makes samples for. One day, he asks her about her weight and she explains that she's carrying a baby. Kotaro thought babies were brought in a peach, but the lady tells him that a baby made when a mom and a dad love each other. Kotaro is surprised that he was also made from his mom and dad's love. It makes him sad, especially when the lady says that babies are a gift that bring joy. He wonders if he was also a gift. He even asks the cat at the park if he really did bring joy to his parents. He writes on his journal that he will try his best to bring joy and gives it to Kobayashi when she brings his allowance over. But Kobayashi doesn't understand what he means by this. Soon, a new tenant, Aota, arrives at Kotaro's door to introduce himself and offer him a gift. He'll be renting for a month for business purposes. He begs Kotaro to be his friend for that month so he doesn't feel lonely. Kotaro accepts and in the evening he prepares to go to the bathhouse with Aota. He let Karino know this and that Aota will be dropping off and picking him up from school for the month. Karino is okay with this though Kotaro thinks he's jealous. Kotaro and Aota spend a lot of time together and find that they suspiciously have a lot in common. After a while, Aota asks Karino for information on Kotaro because Kotaro refuses to tell him anything personal. Karino becomes suspicious so he refuses to disclose anything and asks Aota to respect that. Later at night, Aota calls someone and tells them that they have found Kotaro. Holding a picture of him in his hand turns out that he's working for Kotaro's father. Tamaru, who is also suspicious of Aota, takes Karino to visit him in his room. He bribes him to reveal who he's working for and Aota folds immediately. He also confesses that he plans to tell Kotaro's father everything he has discovered because that's his job, but he assures them that Kotaro is protected by law because there's a restraining order against Kotaro's father. Aota believes that it's best Kotaro lives with his real parents so he can be happy. This annoys Tamaru, and as he's about to punch Aota, Kotaro appears and intervenes. He asks Tamaru to stop bullying Aota and Tamaru leaves with Karino, who ponders on Aota's words. After the night ends, Kotaro asks Aota if he'll tell his father that he's found him, which shocks Aota. He didn't expect Kotaro to have figured out his identity. The next morning, Kotaro asks Karino to take him to school and explains that Aota had to urgently leave. Karino goes to tell this to Tamaru, who immediately concludes that Aota has gone to report to Kotaro's father. Mizuki finds out as well, and the three of them go patrol the gates of Kotaro's kindergarten. They want to make sure that Kotaro is by their side at all times. After school, the three escort Kotaro home while keeping an eye out for his father, which gets the attention of passers-by. They don't tell Kotaro why they're doing this, but he has an idea. Even at night, the three neighbors stay in guard at his door and even accompany him to the bathhouse together. While coming back, Kotaro annoyed with them because he had told them not to do this and runs away. Karino later visits him in his room and asks him why he insists on living alone. Kotaro replies that it's because he wants to become strong and refuses to elaborate any further. The next day, Aota returns and talks to Kotaro while the other neighbors watch closely. He asks to go with Kotaro to the park to meet Takuya, and Kotaro agrees. The neighbors follow them behind, and Aota lets them know that Kotaro's father will arrive the next day to look for Kotaro. They become worried and think of helping Kotaro escape. However, Aota reveals that he lied to Kotaro's father about Kotaro's real address, so they shouldn't worry about anything. The reason is because Aota also had a terrible childhood with scars to show for it, so he understands what Kotaro has been through. While at the park, Takuya sees an ant and freaks out. Kotaro helps him out and encourages him to become strong enough to handle an ant. Kotaro is also training to become strong so he can live with his father one day. He wants to be able to help him fight his demons, indicating that he blames himself for his father's behavior. He thinks that if he can be better and stronger, his father will eventually treat him better. The neighbors realize this, and while going back home, Karino races Kotaro and loses because he's out of shape. He then asks him to become his rival so they can be strong together. Kotaro lights up in excitement and accepts immediately. He's looking forward to getting stronger with his neighbor. Karino knows this won't change anything, but he wants to help Kotaro become mentally strong so he can overcome his difficulties. One day, Kotaro gets called by a scammer and he tells him that the owner of the house is out and will return in 5 minutes. The scammer calls again in 5 minutes and Kotaro tells him the same thing again. This continues for the whole day and the scammer becomes annoyed with the Kotaro. However, they chat a little bit and the scammer ends up learning that Kotaro is in kindergarten and lives alone. He starts to feel bad for him but also remembers that he's a deadbeat father too. Anyhow, he tells Kotaro that he has a money problem at work and must pass on this message to the owner. However, Kotaro is not going to do that. He just wanted to stay on the phone with the scammer. That's because the scammer sounds just like his father when he used to be nice to him. He even asks him to praise him for doing a good job, which reminds the scammer that he never says that to his kid. To atone, he praises Kotaro and Kotaro thanks him before hanging up. At the end of the month, Kotaro asks the neighbors to do a farewell party for Aota as he'll be leaving. He even gives him a magnifying glass as a parting gift and Aota feels grateful. After some time, a girl in Kotaro's class, Kana, asks to visit his house to play after school. Karino picks them up and supervises them for the rest of the afternoon. Kana and Kotaro are really so they don't know what to do together. They just sit and stare at each other, which make everything awkward. Karino suggests a game of cards and the kids agree. The next day, Kana decides to visit Kotaro again and Kotaro has to come up with something fun to do because playing cards was boring for Kana. The following day, Kana decides to visit again and again and again. One day, Kotaro asks her to just hang out with her real friends because she doesn't even enjoy herself with him. Kana says that she doesn't mind, plus her mom is fine with it. Karino recalls hearing from the gossip moms that Kana's dad lost his job and they had to sell the house, so he confronts Kana's mom when she comes to fetch Kana. He figured out that she didn't want Kana to feel less fortunate among her friends because of their situation, so she made her see Kotaro's situation to feel better. Karino doesn't like that and asks her to never let Kana visit Kotaro again. The mom takes Kana and leaves. On the way home, she asks Kana if she enjoyed Kotaro's company and Kana says no, but she doesn't mind playing with him if it'll make her mom happy. The mom realizes how terrible she's been and apologizes to Kana. One day, Kotaro gets sick at school but refuses to acknowledge it because it'll make him look weak. Karino gets called to take him home but he refuses to leave. Another kid named Kei, who always gets sick, tells the teacher that he isn't feeling well and the teacher takes him to the nurse. Before they get there, Kotaro asks him why he always admits to weaknesses in front of the class so easily. Kei replies that it's because he doesn't want to pass on his sickness to the others so they can think what they want while they stay healthy. Kotaro is surprised by this. He never thought of it like that, so he apologizes for assuming Kei was weak and Kei leaves. Kotaro then agrees to leave with Karino after concluding that strength comes in many other forms than a healthy body. Before the weekends, Kobayashi visits Kotaro and invites him to a trip to view an apartment. She thinks he knows so much about living alone, so he'll help her a lot. They take a train and get to the apartment complex soon. It turns out to be the place Kotaro and his parents used to live. Kotaro doesn't seem too happy about coming back here but agrees that the apartment is great. He asks if Kobayashi read his journals and she confirms before apologizing. The reason is because Kotaro wrote about a stain mark on his ceiling that is similar to the one in his parents' house. He forgot where it was though, so he thinks Kobayashi brought him there to find the mark. He looks around and finally finds it. He stares at it quietly for some time before Kobayashi tells the agent that the place isn't for them. One day, Kotaro goes to collect some leaves to eat and meets a boy with his two younger siblings. They are poor and eat leaves too because they can't afford food. The boy learns that Kotaro isn't poor and lives alone. He asks him to look after his siblings while he goes and takes care of something. Kotaro stays there with the kids until late, but the boy doesn't return. The kids start crying. He decides to take them home and finds the boy sitting outside eating chips. The kids are happy to see him and take his chips for themselves. This saddens him because he just wanted to be by himself for a while without having to worry about them. It's too much burden for him to look after them since their parents abandoned them. Kotaro doesn't understand why the boy feels this way. But to the boy, it's clear that they, including Kotaro, have been thrown away by their parents. Kotaro strongly disagrees with this. He doesn't think either of them have been thrown away since they can't agree. The boy and his siblings walk out on Kotaro, leaving him outside. He visits the kids again on a different day, but before he can enter their building, he overhears some women talking about the kids having been taken by child services. The women also believe the kids were abandoned and that it's awful, but Kotaro still disagrees. After a while, he moves on and invites Mizuki to share some treats he got from the landlady. Karino joins them and they see an announcement on TV for Tana Soman the movie. Kotaro is pumped for it as it motivates him to become as strong as Tana Soman. This inspires Mizuki to be strong too and break up with her abusive boyfriend. Her boyfriend doesn't react well and she's forced to wear a mask to hide her bruises. Kotaro sees through her makeup and asks what happened. Mizuki decides to tell him and Karino that her boyfriend demands money from her and stalks her when she tries to ignore him. She was too scared to leave him all along and now he has hurt her. Tamaru also arrives and finds out about this. Karino advises that Mizuki involved the police, but Tamaru suggests beating up the guy himself. Kotaro tells her to quickly leave her apartment and her job before her boyfriend finds her and do something even worse. He keeps pestering her throughout the next day so she can hurry up and leave. When Mizuki finally catches him, he realizes that she still loves her boyfriend. He tells her she needs to move so she doesn't turn her boyfriend into a bad guy. He turns his father into a bad guy so he doesn't want Mizuki to make the same mistake. Mizuki breaks down crying because it's hard to move so suddenly, but she finally does it and apologizes to Kotaro for leaving even though she promised to stay forever. She hugs and tells him that she loves him. Kotaro is wearing a mask so no one can see and judge him for crying over this. But Karino and Tamaru wouldn't do that since they know some farewells can be heartbreaking. After some time has passed, Karino goes to the movies with Kotaro and 3 of his friends. The friends are very talkative and super active that Karino regrets his decision to bring them along. Kotaro, on the other hand, isn't having a good time. He wanted to watch Tana Soman the movie, but his friends suggested a 3D dinosaur movie instead. After the movie, the friends want to continue playing at the mall, but Kotaro gets annoyed and puts a stop to it. He suggests that they go home so Karino can focus on his work. They all decide to leave, and as Kotaro's friends get picked up, Kotaro tells Karino he's disappointed in him for having fun with his friends. He felt ignored the whole time. Karino finds this funny because Kotaro is being jealous all of a sudden, but he apologizes. He then takes him to the movies again so he can watch Tana Soman. One day, Kotaro meets Tamaru's son, Yuta, who has come to visit his father. Tamaru is not around, so Yuta waits for him with Kotaro. Tamaru soon returns and is surprised to see his son. He's not too happy because Yuta shouldn't be there. Tamaru had always thought Yuta didn't want to see him, but it was the mom who lied about that. He tells Yuta to go home because lied to his mom. He speaks coldly towards Yuta, unlike when he's with Kotaro. He then calls the mom to pick him up and Yuta becomes disappointed that he couldn't stay with his father. He cries and leaves. Once he's gone, Kotaro pokes Tamaru with his toy sword for turning Yuta away even though he always whines about not seeing him enough. Tamaru explains that he wants Yuta to grow up to obey rules and not do as he likes all the time. He didn't turn him away because he didn't love him. No father would do that, not even Kotaro's father. He then starts crying because he didn't want to do what he did, and Kotaro consoles him for being a good dad. After a while, a new neighbor, Takei, moves into Mizuki's old room. She's become very strict with Karino and Tamaru but tries to be friendly with Kotaro, though she's uncomfortable around him. Karino picks up on this and asks her to fetch Kotaro from school. One day, she does so, and in the evening Kotaro tells Karino about. He has also realized that Takei is uncomfortable around him and wishes it was not the case, so Karino goes to ask her to be herself around Kotaro even if she doesn't like kids. Takei becomes upset because she doesn't want judges by society for this. She's trying her best to be comfortable around kids and doesn't need to be discouraged. The next day, she continues to play with Kotaro and he tells her that his parents were also like her around him but they overcame it. He promises to help her out. Takei and Karino are relieved to hear that Kotaro doesn't take offense to Takei's condition. Over time, Kotaro starts gaining weight, which worries Takei. Karino tells her about his previous family situation, making her conclude that he might be overeating. Later, while visiting Karino, she sees the kindergarten's kids menu up for discussion in the next Guardians meeting. She asks to attend the meeting on Karino's behalf and he agrees. In the meeting, they make the food on the menu for the kids and their parents. After eating, the kids give Kotaro their leftovers to eat and Takei finally sees why Kotaro is gaining weight. The parents and teacher think Kotaro has a big appetite, but he's only doing it because he doesn't want to waste food, so he eats even when he's not hungry. The parents feel bad and the teacher promises Takei that she'll do something about it in the next meeting. At the end, Kotaro rallies up all the kids and they chase Takei around to help her with her condition. One day, Kotaro invites his neighbors to his museum in his room to show them his most treasured collection. Many of the things in the collection are things he was given by the neighbors and some gloves that his mother left behind. He treasures the gloves because she used them to wash and feed him when he was younger. The neighbors are shocked and Takei becomes angry. She asks him to throw the gloves away because they are garbage, not treasure. Karino and Tamaru try to intervene but she gets even angrier. This reminds her that her own mother used to do the same thing because she hated her. Kotaro apologizes because he wants to keep the gloves. They reminded him of his mother who couldn't touch him without wearing them because he disgusted her. He wants her to be able to touch him again when she comes back home. On another day, Kotaro meets Takei at the train station after she knocks off work. He's there to share his umbrella with those who need it since it's raining. This is his rainy season tradition. He offers to share with Takei but she refuses because she has her own, so he shares with someone else. This continues for several days and Takei realizes that Kotaro has a lot of customers. She secretly follows him around and sees how he gets them. He always leaves with a wet shoulder, which worries her. She asks him about it and he reveals that his mentor taught him that this is how you show that you care about the other person. You give them most of the umbrella, which would get your shoulder wet. The mentor is none other than his father, who used to do the same thing. However, his mother didn't care much and covered herself more, which got his shoulder wet. Kotaro wishes he could one day show his parents that he cares about them by having his shoulder wet while they stay dry in the rain. Takei praises him for this and accepts sharing an umbrella with him. She holds the umbrella and keeps him dry while she gets the wet shoulder. Kotaro offers to hold the umbrella in the future and Takei anxiously accepts. At their gate, Kotaro and Karino meet Tasuku, who makes Karino uncomfortable. Kotaro immediately invites him to his room so they can catch up over some banana curry. While they eat, Tasuku reveals that he's heard Kotaro is getting an allowance every week. He then asks him for a favor. After some time though, Kobayashi arrives at Karino's room because she's concerned that Kotaro has been asking for more money. He never says why, so Kobayashi needs help with that. Karino realizes that Tasuku could be the reason and confronts him. One night, Tasuku tells him that he and Kotaro are planning on moving in together in a different apartment, which is very costly. Karino becomes worried because he always thought Kotaro wanted to become strong by living alone. Tasuku thinks it's best they live together because they lived in the same group home and are practically family. Karino then tells this to Kobayashi and Kobayashi decides to do a background check on Tasuku. After, Karino goes to ask Kotaro about his plan to live with Tasuku and Kotaro confirms it. Karino pretends that it's no big deal, but deep down, he's saddened that Tasuku and Kotaro are more family than him and Kotaro. Kobayashi visits Karino again and lets him know about Tasuku's bad debt, which is suddenly starting to get paid. The two decide to tell this to Kotaro the next day, but they can't bring themselves to, and Kotaro ends up refusing to talk about the matter any further. Because of this, they decide to confront Tasuku about his debt. He denies everything and prefers to not talk about it too because it's his and Kotaro's business. This angers Karino because Kotaro absolutely trusts Tasuku. He walks away and Kobayashi follows him behind. Right after Kotaro arrives behind Tasuku and tells him about a gift he got for him. They go inside while Kobayashi and Karino listen in on their chat through the walls. Karino asks Kobayashi to let the matter go for now so Kotaro can figure things out on his own. All they should do is try to support him. In Kotaro's room, Tasuku worries that Karino and Kobayashi might have told Kotaro something bad about him. Kotaro says that they wanted to, but he already knows him, so he didn't need to hear it from them. Tasuku is shocked because he thought Kotaro would buy his lies. However, Kotaro isn't mad at him, he even gives him his allowance. He doesn't care that Tasuku is a thief and a liar. He's been since they lived in group home. All he cares about is that they are friends and friends stick by each other no matter what. He then gives him a bag of coins because the allowance isn't money he earned on his own, but the coins are. He earned them by collecting cans. Tasuku feels bad for what he did. He even cries because people have been this kind to him. He apologizes and thanks Kotaro. Over the next day, Kotaro continues to collect cans because he hopes one day he can truly live with Tasuku. Kobayashi reveals that Tasuku has since turned his life around and has a good job now to pay back the money he took from Kotaro. Kotaro wishes that he can build a huge castle for all the people in his life to live together with him, including his parents. This is his new dream and he says it with a big and genuine smile. As time goes, Karino gets busy with his work, so one of his ex-girlfriends, Nita, goes to fetch Kotaro from school. Nita will be staying with Karino for some time. She sees how close Karino is with Kotaro and thinks it's a bad idea, so she decides to get closer to Kotaro and do things for him in order for Karino to focus on his work. She also tells Kotaro this and uses the word burden, which makes him think that he's been a burden to Karino all along. The next day, he tells Karino that he doesn't need to do anything for him anymore. Karino doesn't understand why, so he follows him and Nita to the bathhouse instead of doing his work. Nita doesn't like this and makes it clear that Karino doesn't have time for things like hanging out with Kotaro and taking him places. Karino realizes that Nita might have said something to Kotaro and tells her that he's not going to change his routine. The next day, he follows Kotaro and Nita to school, but he's too tired since he didn't sleep well due to working all night. Nita gets annoyed with him and asks him what's on his schedule for the day. Karino only says it's his manga's deadline, which upsets Kotaro. That's because there's a showcase at the kindergarten and the teacher sent out pamphlets for it. However, Nita didn't give the pamphlet to Karino, so he doesn't know. At the time of the show, Nita secretly goes to the school while Karino stays home and work on his manga. Kotaro is so sad throughout the whole thing and the teacher notices. However, Karino suddenly appears and changes Kotaro's mood, making him happy and enthusiastic, but then he remembers what Nita said about being a burden to Karino and feels sad again. It also turns out that Karino knew about the showcase all along and was lying to Nita. She doesn't understand why he's there and even cares about Kotaro when he's not his parent. Karino replies that he just wants to be there for him since every kid at the school has their parents except for Kotaro. Plus, Kotaro motivated him to work hard on his manga, so he doesn't want to disappoint him. Nita accepts that she was wrong for trying to change their routine. She later apologizes to Kotaro for trying to separate them and encourages him to be there for Karino as well. Kotaro agrees to make up with Karino and be there for him too. One day, Kotaro waits for his 5th newspaper delivery guy to arrive as he's late. He has 5 subscriptions, which is weird to the delivery guy that he can't stop thinking about it. When he realizes that Kotaro is the one who actually subscribed to the newspapers, he fears that someone might have forced him to do it, but Kotaro tells him that he must do this since he lives alone. When something bad happens, go in the newspapers will pile off on his door. In that way, people will notice and check on him. However, in reality, Kotaro is just looking for reports on different tragedies affecting his mother or father. When he doesn't find their names on the newspapers, he feels relieved because it means they are still safe. On another day, he sees a report on TV for a shopping arcade in Kinome Station. Kotaro remembers going there one time, but he can't remember exactly where it was, so he asks Karino to take him there the next day. He wants to go to the cemetery where his grandparents are buried. When they get there, he buys flowers and looks for their grave to pay his respects. He didn't know them because they died before he was born, but he hopes he can ask his mom about them one day. The two begin cleaning the grave and Karino sees the name of Kotaro's mother on the side of the grave, but he doesn't tell Kotaro. He even covers the side with his body so that Kotaro doesn't see it. Kotaro pays his respects and asks his grandparents to tell his mother when she visits that he's doing well. While doing so, he hears footsteps and looks up eagerly hoping to see his mother, but it turns out to be a different woman. He becomes disappointed and asks Karino if he'll ever see his mother again. Karino decides to lie and says yes, which makes Kotaro hopeful again. He trusts that Karino would never lie to him, and so he believes that he will one day see his mother. They go back home and meet up with Tamaru and Takei at the gate. All of them walk inside happily like a family. Thanks for watching. Want more anime recaps? Subscribe the channels and turn on notification bell.